Welcome to the fifth night, horror fam. Oh, I can't contain myself. We've reached the first Saturday in our spooky season, and tonight we're entering some truly terrifying territory. Haunted houses. I hope you guys are ready for one of the best collections yet, filled with eerie encounters and ghostly happenings that will make you question what's hiding in the shadows of your own home. Tonight we've got an award-winning creepypasta that's sure to send chills down your spine, true scary stories, and of course, a haunting tale from our dear friend Mike the Naked Bigfoot. His story has an extra layer of mystery and meaning. You won't want to miss it. So lock the doors, turn off the lights, and get ready for a night of haunted houses and spine-tingling fear.
Calls for missing persons are all too common in college towns. Most of the time, it's some kid partying late. His mom gets nervous and calls the cops 15 minutes after curfew. More often than not, the kid will just stroll in, clearly impaired, while mom is talking to the cops. Other times it's these Romeo and Juliet cases. The kids think they're in love and they want to get married. But this was different. No one would call Michael a partygoer. He did have a girlfriend, but she was just as upset as everyone else. The last record of anyone talking to him was a text message he sent to his girlfriend about an old house and some prize money. She texted him back to see where he was, but he stopped replying.
Good evening, children. I've lost all kinds of things. Socks, remotes, jobs. But having a person go missing is far worse. In tonight's frightening feature, we're going back in time 1 month to find out what happened to Michael. I'm sure there'll be a logical explanation. After all, people don't just disappear, do they?
Before I start, it's important for you to know that Peter was a burnout. He and I were friends during our freshman year of college, and continued to talk even after he dropped out. I moved out of the dorms and into a small apartment my junior year. I didn't see Peter as much. We would talk online every now and then, and text here and there. But that was it. There was a period where we didn't talk at all, for about a month. I wasn't worried. He was a pretty notorious flake, and a drug addict, so I assumed he just stopped caring. Then one night I saw he was on Facebook. Before I could initiate a conversation, he sent me a message. Michael, man, we need to talk. That was when he told me about the No End House. It allegedly got that name because no one has ever reached the final exit. It was pretty much the same as any of those silly internet challenges, but this one gave you money. The rules were pretty simple and cliche. Reach the final room of the building and you win $500. There were 9 rooms in all. The house was located outside of the city, roughly 4 miles from where I lived. Apparently, Peter had tried and failed. He was an addict. If he mixed narcotics and the scary challenge together, he'd be so easy to scare. A paper ghost would get the best of him. He told me it would be too much for anyone, that it was unnatural. I didn't believe him. I told him I would check it out the next night, and no matter how hard he tried to convince me otherwise, $500 sounded too good to be true. I had to go. I set out the following night. When I arrived, I immediately noticed something strange about the building. Have you ever seen or read something that shouldn't be scary, but for some reason, a chill crawls up your spine? I brushed off the chill and walked towards the building. The feeling of uneasiness only intensified as I opened the front door. My heart slowed, and I let a relieved sigh leave me as I entered. The room looked like a normal hotel lobby, decorated for Halloween. A sign was posted in place of a worker. It read, "Room 1, this way. 8 more to follow. Reach the end and you win." I chuckled and made my way to the first door. The first area was almost laughable. The decor resembled the Halloween aisle of a Kmart, complete with chic ghosts and animatronic zombies that gave out a static growl when you passed by. At the far end was an exit. It was the only door besides the one I entered through. I brushed through the kitty Halloween decorations and headed for the second room. I was greeted by fog as I opened the door to room 2. It definitely upped the ante in terms of technology. Not only was there a fog machine, but a bat hung from the ceiling and flew in a circle. I could hear a Halloween soundtrack playing, the kind that you'd find at a 99-cent store. I didn't see a stereo, but I guess they must have used a PA system. I stepped over a few toy rats that wheeled around and walked with a puffed chest across to the next area. I reached the doorknob and my heart sank to my knees. I didn't want to open that door. A feeling of dread hit me so hard I could barely even think. Logic overtook me after a few terrified moments, and I shook it off and entered the next room. Room 3 is when things began to change. On the surface, it looked like a normal room. There was a chair in the middle of a wood-paneled floor. A single lamp in the corner did a poor job of lighting the area, casting a few shadows across the floor and walls. That was the problem. Shadows. Plural. In addition to the chair's shadow, there were others, but there was nothing else in the room. I had barely walked in the door and was already terrified. I knew something wasn't right. I didn't even think as I automatically tried to open the door I came through. It was locked from the other side. This set me off. Was someone locking the doors as I progressed? There was no way I would have heard them. Was it a mechanical lock that said automatically? Maybe. But I was too scared to really think. I turned back to the room and the shadows were gone. The chair's shadow remained, but the others were gone. I slowly began to walk. I used to hallucinate when I was a kid, so I wrote off the shadows as a figment of my imagination and began to feel better as I made it to the halfway point of the room. I looked down as I took my steps. That's when I saw it. Or didn't see it. My shadow wasn't there. I didn't have time to scream. I ran as fast as I could to the other door and dove into room 4 without thinking. The fourth room was possibly the most disturbing. As I closed the door, all the light seemed to be sucked out of the room. I stood there, surrounded by darkness, not able to move. I'm not afraid of the dark, never have been, but I was absolutely terrified. All sight had left me. I reached out with my hand to see if I could get any information. All it did was confirm how dark it was. I couldn't even see my hand. But it wasn't just dark. I couldn't hear anything either. It was dead quiet. Even in the quietest of rooms, you can still hear yourself breathing. You can hear yourself being alive. I could not. I began to stumble forward after a few moments, my rapidly beating heart being the only thing I could feel. There was no door in sight. I wasn't even sure there was one this time. The silence was then broken by a low hum. I felt something behind me and quickly spun around, but could barely even see my nose. Still, I knew it was there. Regardless of how dark it was, I knew something was there. The hum grew louder and closer. It seemed to surround me. But I knew whatever was causing the noise was in front of me, inching closer. I took a step back. I had never felt that kind of fear. I can't even really describe it. I wasn't even scared I was going to die. I was scared of what the alternative was. I was afraid of what this thing had in store for me. Then the lights flashed for a second, and I saw it. Nothing. I saw nothing, and I know I saw nothing there. All at once, the room was again plunged into darkness, and the hum became a wild screech. I screamed in protest. I couldn't handle hearing this goddamn sound for another minute. I ran backwards away from the noise and fumbled for the door handle. I turned it and fell into room 5. Now, before I describe room 5, you have to understand something. I am not a drug user. I have had no history of drug abuse or any sort of psychosis, short of the childhood hallucinations I mentioned earlier, and those were limited to when I was really tired or just waking up. I entered with a clear head. After falling in from the previous room, my view of room 5 was from my back, looking up at the ceiling. What I saw didn't scare me. It simply surprised me. Trees had grown into the room and towered above my head. The ceiling in this room was taller than the others, which made me think I was in the center of the house. I got up off the floor, dusted myself off, and took a look around. This was definitely the biggest room of them all. I couldn't even see the door from where I was. Various brush and trees must have blocked my line of sight with the exit. Up to this point, I figured the rooms were going to get scarier, but this was paradise compared to the last room. I also assumed whatever was in room 4 stayed back there. I was incredibly wrong. As I made my way deeper into the room, I began to hear what one would hear if they were in a forest. Chirping bugs, the occasional flap of birds. These sounds appeared to be my only company in the room. That was the thing that bothered me, though. I could hear the bugs and other animals, but I didn't see any of them. I began to wonder how big this house was. From the outside, when I first walked up to it, it looked like a regular house. It was definitely on the bigger side, but this was almost a full forest in here. I could only assume the ceiling existed somewhere above the treetops. I couldn't see any walls either. The only way I knew I was still inside was that the floor matched the other rooms. It had the same standard dark wood paneling. I kept walking, hoping that the next tree I passed would reveal the door. After a few moments of walking, I felt a bug fly onto my arm. I shook it off and kept going. A second later, I felt about 10 more land on my skin at different places. I felt them crawl up and down on my arms and legs. A few made their way across my face. I flailed wildly to get them all off, but they just kept crawling. I looked down and let out a muffled scream, maybe more of a whimper to be honest. I didn't see a single bug. Not one bug was on me, but I could feel them crawl. I heard them fly by my face. I could feel them sting my skin, but I couldn't see a single one. I dropped to the ground and began to roll wildly. I was desperate. I hated bugs, especially ones I couldn't see or touch. But these bugs could touch me, and they were everywhere. I began to crawl. I had no idea where I was going. The entrance was nowhere in sight, and I still hadn't even seen the exit. So I just crawled, my skin wriggling with the presence of those phantom bugs. After what seemed like hours, I found the door. I grabbed the nearest tree and propped myself up, mindlessly slapping my arms and legs to no avail. I tried to run, but I couldn't. My body was exhausted from crawling and dealing with whatever was on me. I took a few shaky steps to the door, grabbing each tree on the way for support. It was only a few feet away when I heard it, the low hum from before. It was coming from the next room, and it was deeper. I could almost feel it inside my body, like when you stand next to an amp at a concert. The feeling of the bugs on me lessened as the hum grew louder. As I placed my hand on the doorknob, the bugs were completely gone. But I couldn't bring myself to turn the knob. I knew that if I let it go, the bugs would return, and there was no way I would make it back to room 4. I just stood there, my head pressed against the door marked 6, and my hand shakily grasping the knob. The hum was so loud, I couldn't even hear myself think. There was nothing I could do but move on. Room 6 was next, and room 6 was hell. I closed the door behind me, my eyes held shut, and my ears ringing. As the door clicked into place, the hum was gone. I opened my eyes in surprise. The door I had just shut was gone. It was just a wall now. I looked around in shock. The room was identical to room 3. The same chair and lamp, but with the correct amount of shadows this time. The only real difference was that there was no exit door, and the one I came in through was gone. As I said before, I had no previous issues in terms of mental instability, but at that moment, I fell into insanity. I didn't scream. I didn't make a sound. At first, I scratched softly. The wall was tough, but I knew the door was there somewhere. I just knew it was. I scratched at where the doorknob was. I clawed at the wall frantically with both hands, my nails being filed down to the skin against the wood. I fell silently to my knees. The only sound in the room was me scratching against the wall. I knew it was just there. I knew if I could just get past this wall.
Are you all right?
I jumped off the ground and spun in one motion. I leaned against the wall behind me and saw what it was that spoke to me. I regret ever turning around. There was a little girl, wearing a soft white dress. She had blonde hair, white skin, and blue eyes. She was the most frightening thing I had ever seen, and I know that nothing in my life will ever be as unnerving as what I saw in her. Where she stood, I saw what looked like a man's body, only larger than normal. It wasn't the devil, but at that moment it might as well have been. It was horrifying, and it was synonymous with the little girl. They were the same creature. I can't really describe it, but I saw them at the same time. They shared the same spot. But it was like looking at two separate dimensions. When the girl would come in clearer, the form would vanish, and when the form came in clearer, the girl would vanish. I couldn't speak. My mind was revolting against what it was attempting to process. I had been scared before in my life, and had never been more scared than when I was trapped in that fourth room. But that was before room 6. I just stood there, staring at whatever it was that spoke to me. There was no exit. I was trapped here with it. And then it spoke again.
Michael, you should have listened. 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 Michael, you should have listened.
When it spoke, I heard the words of the little girl. But the other form spoke through my mind, in a voice I won't attempt to describe. There was no other sound. The voice just kept repeating that sentence over and over and over in my mind. And I agreed. I didn't know what to do. I was slipping into madness. Yet I couldn't take my eyes off of what was in front of me. I dropped to the floor. I thought I passed out, but the room wouldn't let me. I just wanted it to end. I was on my side, my eyes wide open, and the form staring down at me. Scurrying across the floor in front of me was one of those battery-powered rats from the second room. The house was toying with me, but for some reason, seeing that rat pulled my mind back from whatever depths it was headed, and I looked around the room. I was getting out of there. I was determined to get out of that house and live and never think about this place again. At first, it was just my eyes that moved. I searched the walls for any opening. The room wasn't very big, so it didn't take long to soak up the entire layout. The demon still taunted me, the voice growing louder as the form stayed rooted where it stood. I placed my hand on the floor, lifted myself up on all fours, and turned to scan the wall behind me. The form, that monster, was now right at my back, whispering into my mind how I shouldn't have come. I felt its breath on the back of my neck, but I refused to turn around. When inspecting the wall, I noticed a large rectangle was scratched into the wood, with the large 7 etched right in the center of it. Somehow in my earlier panic, I must have scratched the 7th door into the wall. I knew what it was. Room 7 was just beyond that wall where room 5 previously existed. Room 7 was close. I knew the demon was right behind me, but for some reason it couldn't touch me. I closed my eyes, placed both hands on the large 7, and started pushing.
You shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't have come here.
I pushed as hard as I could. The demon was now screaming in my ear. It told me I was never leaving. It told me that this was the end. But I wasn't going to die. I was going to live there in room 6 with it. Forever. I was not. I pushed and screamed at the top of my lungs. I knew eventually I would push through that wall. I clenched my eyes shut and screamed, and the demon vanished. I was left in silence. I turned around slowly and was greeted by the room as it was when I entered. Just a chair and a lamp. I couldn't believe it. But I didn't have time to figure out what happened. I just turned back to the wall and jumped back slightly. What I saw was a door. It wasn't the one I scratched in it, but a regular door with the large 7 on it. My whole body was shaking. It took me a while to turn the knob. I just stood there for a while, staring at the door. I couldn't stay in room 6. I couldn't. But if this was only room 6, I couldn't imagine what 7 had in store. I must have stood there for an hour, just staring at the 7. Finally, with a deep breath, I twisted the knob and opened the door to room 7. I stumbled through the door, mentally exhausted and physically weak. The door behind me closed, and I realized where I was. I was outside. Not outside like room 5, but actually outside. My eyes stung. I wanted to cry. I fell to my knees and tried, but I couldn't. I was finally out of that hell. I didn't even care about the prize that was promised. I turned and saw that the door I just went through was the entrance. I walked to my car and drove home, thinking of how nice a shower sounded. As I pulled up to my place, I felt uneasy. The joy of leaving No End House had faded, and dread was slowly building in my stomach. I shook it off as residual from the house and made my way to the door. I entered and immediately went to my room. There on my bed was my cat, Baskerville. He was the first living thing I had seen all night, and I reached to pet him. He hissed and swiped at my hand. I recoiled in shock. He'd never acted like that. But he was an old cat, so I guess it was whatever. I jumped in the shower and got ready for what I was expecting to be a sleepless night. After my shower, I went to the kitchen to make something to eat. I walked down the hall and turned into the living room. What I saw there would be forever burned into my mind. My parents were lying on the ground, covered in blood. They were mutilated to near unidentifiable states. Their limbs were removed and placed next to their bodies, and their heads were placed on their chest, facing me. The most unsettling part was their expressions. They were smiling, as though they were happy to see me. All at once I started sobbing there. I didn't know what happened. They didn't even live with me. I was a mess. Then I saw it. A door that was never there before. A door with a large 8 scrawled on it in blood. I was still in the house. I was standing in my living room, but I was standing in room 7. The faces of my parents smiled wider as I realized this. They weren't my parents. They couldn't be. But they looked exactly like them. The door marked 8 was across the room, behind the mutilated bodies in front of me. I knew I had to move on, but at that moment I gave up. The smiling faces tore into my mind. They grounded me where I stood. I nearly collapsed. Then, the hum returned. It was louder than ever, and it filled the house and shook the walls. The hum compelled me to walk. I began to walk, slowly, making my way closer to the door and the bodies. I could barely stand, let alone walk, and the closer I got to my parents, the more intense the humming became. The walls were now shaking so hard it seemed as if they were going to crumble, but still, their faces smiled at me. As I inched closer, their eyes followed me. I was now between the 2 bodies, a few feet away from the door. The dismembered hands crawled their way across the carpet towards me, all while the faces continued to stare. New terror washed over me, and I walked faster. I didn't want to hear them speak. I didn't want to hear their voices match the voices of my parents. They began to open their mouths, and their hands were inches from my feet. In a dash of desperation, I lunged towards the door, threw it open, and slammed it behind me. Room 8. I was done. After what I just experienced, I knew there wasn't anything else this house could throw at me. There was nothing short of the fires of hell that I wasn't ready for. Unfortunately, things got more disturbing, more terrifying, and more unspeakable in Room 8. I still have trouble believing what I saw in Room 8. Again, the room was a carbon copy of Rooms 3 and 6, but sitting in the usually empty chair was a man. After a few seconds of disbelief, my mind finally accepted the fact that the man sitting in the chair was me. Not someone that looked like me. It was me. It was Michael. I walked closer. I had to get a better look, even though I was sure of it. He looked up at me, and I noticed tears in his eyes. Please, please, please don't do it. Please don't hurt me. What? I asked. Who are you? I'm not going to hurt you. Yes, you are, yes, you are, yes, you are. He was sobbing now. You're gonna hurt me. I know you're gonna hurt me, and I don't want you to hurt me. Don't hurt me, 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 don't hurt me. He sat in the chair, panicking. It was actually pretty pathetic looking, especially since he was me, identical in every way. Listen, who are you? I was now only a few feet from my doppelganger. It was the weirdest experience yet. Standing there talking to myself, I wasn't scared, but I would be soon. Why are you... You're gonna hurt me, you're gonna hurt me, you're gonna hurt me, if you want to leave, you're going to hurt me, don't hurt me. Why are you saying this? Just calm down, alright? Let's try to figure this... And then I saw it. The Michael sitting down was wearing the same clothes as me, except for a small red patch on his shirt, embroidered with the number 9. You're gonna hurt me, you're gonna hurt me, you're gonna hurt me, please don't, you're gonna hurt me. My eyes didn't leave that small number on his chest. I knew exactly what it was. The first few doors were plain and simple, but after a while they got a little more ambiguous. 7 was scratched into the wall, but by my own hands. 8 was marked in blood above the bodies of my parents. But 9, this number was a person, a living person. Worse still, it was on a person that looked exactly like me. Michael? I had to ask. Yes, you're gonna hurt me, you're gonna hurt me, you're gonna hurt me. He continued to sob. He answered to Michael. He was me. But that 9. I paced around for a few minutes while he sobbed in his chair. The room had no door, and similar to room 6, the door I came through was gone. For some reason, I knew that scratching would get me nowhere this time. I studied the walls and the floor around the chair, sticking my head underneath and seeing if anything was below. Unfortunately, there was. Below the chair was a knife. Attached was a tag that read, "To Michael, from management." The feeling in my stomach as I read that tag was something sinister. I felt sick. The last thing I wanted to do was remove that knife from under the chair. The other Michael was still sobbing uncontrollably. My mind was spinning. I had so many unanswered questions. Who put this here? And how did they get my name? Not to mention the fact that as I knelt on the cold wood floor, I also sat in that chair, sobbing in protest of being hurt by myself. It was all too much to process. The house and the management had been playing with me this whole time. My thoughts for some reason turned to Peter, and whether or not he got this far. And if he did he meet a Peter sobbing in this very chair? I shook these thoughts out of my head. They didn't matter. I took the knife from under the chair, and immediately the other Michael went quiet.
Michael,
He said in a sinister voice.
what do you think you're going to do?
I lifted myself from the ground and clenched the knife in my hand. "I'm going to get out of here." Michael was still sitting in the chair, though he was very calm now. He looked up at me with a slight grin. I couldn't tell if he was going to laugh or strangle me. Slowly he got up from the chair and stood facing me. It was uncanny. His height, weight, posture, it all matched me. I felt the rubber hilt of the knife in my hand and gripped it tighter. I don't know what I was planning to do with it, but I had a feeling I was going to need it.
"Now, I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to hurt you, and I'm going to keep you here."
I didn't respond. I just lunged and tackled him to the ground. I had mounted him and looked down, knife poised and ready. He looked up at me, terrified. It was like I was looking in a mirror. Then the hum returned, low and distant, though I still felt it deep in my body. Michael looked up at me as I looked down at myself. The hum was getting louder, and I felt something inside me snap. With one motion, I slammed the knife into the patch on his chest and ripped down. Blackness fell on the room, and I was falling. The darkness around me was like nothing I had ever experienced. Room 4 was dark, but it didn't come close to what was completely engulfing me. I wasn't even sure if I was falling after a while. I felt weightless, covered in dark. Then a deep sadness came over me. I felt lost, depressed. The sight of my parents entered my mind. I knew it wasn't real, but I had seen it, and the mind has trouble differentiating between what is real and what is not. The sadness only deepened. I was in room 9 for what felt like days. The final room. And that's exactly what it was. The end. No end house had an end, and I had reached it. At that moment, I gave up. I knew I would be in that in-between state forever, accompanied by nothing but darkness. Not even the hum was there to keep me sane. I couldn't see, hear. There were no smells. It was like my senses were stolen from me. I felt disembodied and completely lost. I knew where I was. This was hell. Room 9 was hell. Then it happened. A light. One of those stereotypical lights at the end of the tunnel. I felt the ground come up from below me, and I was standing. After a moment or two of gathering my thoughts and senses, I slowly walked towards the light. As I approached the light, it took form. It was a vertical slit down the side of an unmarked door. I slowly walked through the door and found myself back where I started, the lobby of No End House. It was exactly how I left it, still empty, still decorated with childish Halloween decorations. I was still wary of where I was. After a few moments of normalcy, I looked around the place, trying to find anything different. On the desk was a plain white envelope with my name handwritten on it. Immensely curious, yet still cautious, I mustered up the courage to open the envelope. Inside was a letter, again handwritten. To Michael, congratulations. You have made it to the end of No End House. Please accept this prize as a token of this great achievement. Yours forever, Management. With the letter were 5 $100 bills. I started laughing. I laughed for what seemed like hours. I laughed as I walked out to my car, and I laughed as I drove home. I laughed as I parked my car. I laughed as I approached my door, and I laughed as I looked up and saw the number 10.
This is what serial killers jerk off to.
Hey everyone, it's Mike the Naked Bigfoot here. As I've been posting on a little bit of my social media and on Twitter, I've had the opportunity to assist a local paranormal team with an investigation. The team was called out to a home, very prominent, well-to-do family, because the grandparents and the grandchildren had been experiencing some critter that was tormenting and terrifying the grandkids, and eventually found its way into the house and was tormenting and scaring the grandparents. The paranormal team, Hank and Melanie, what they found out when they came there to investigate, they thought it was a ghost or a spirit, because this house is a very old Reconstruction, Southern Reconstruction house, but that fell about around the antebellum period. It's a very large, very old house. It had been in this family's family, in their family for generations. Absolutely beautiful on a huge old piece of property. What they saw on the property, Hank and Melanie, and what the grandkids described and the grandparents described on the property, was a small little creature with red eyes that started out scaring the kids under one of the largest old willow trees I've ever seen in my life, out in the back property where the kids would go out and play in. And it would pop up in the trees and hiss at them and jump down at them, and they'd go right into the house screaming. So naturally, their grandparents and their family thought it was like a wild possum or something. They didn't think, supernatural creature or a cryptid out there trying to get their grandkids. Well, this thing found its way into the house, and the grandparents saw it in the hallways leading down to where the kids would sleep at night. They saw it creeping down the hallway, going towards their grandkids' bedroom. And when the grandfather shouted out at it, he couldn't make out a lot of features of it. He could make out long ears, of course the red eyes, and very long fingers and arms and legs, but a very squat body, and it was creeping down through the hallway. When he yelled out around it, it whirled around on him, and he saw teeth, a flash of white teeth, almost like a grin on its face. And he swore that he heard it laugh at him, this hissing laugh, and it disappeared. It just stepped back and deeper into the shadows and disappeared. It scared the hell out of him. Well, this happened. They saw it several more times in the hallway, and the kids started seeing it underneath their bed. This long fingers coming out from beneath their bed, trying to scare them. Hank and Melanie, they got great pictures and video of scratch marks on the wooden floors and on the bedposts, supposedly made by this thing. It was 3-fingered scratches across the wood and along the hallway where they had seen it walking. They got pictures of the willow tree where there were long, deep, gouged in scratches onto the willow tree, and scratching footprints going towards the windows of the house, because the kids were seeing it outside their bedroom window before it came inside. Hank and Melanie they thought immediately, this is not a ghost. This is not their average haunting or spirit or poltergeist or residual haunting. So they called the resident monster guy in to see what he thought about it. And that was me, of course. So I had my son drive me down there, and I had them walk me through the property, Hank and Melanie, and I got a chance to talk to the grandparents and grandkids and look around a little bit. And my first assumption was it was definitely something supernatural, but it wasn't anything human. And just my basic walking around and listening to how this thing was sneaking through the house and sneaking across the property, it reminded me of 2 things off the top of my head, and it liked to scare people. It didn't hurt anybody, but it liked to jump out and scare people. At first, I thought it would maybe have been, your classic goblin, your classic fairy goblin that was out on the property. Because remember, this property is old as hell. There could be any kind of elemental living out here. My second guess was something called a fair, which is F-E-Y-R. It's a manifestation of fear itself. It takes on the form of fear. It can't hurt you, but it exists just to scare the hell out of you. And then as I was walking around the property, the grandmother had mirrors all over the property, all over the house, old mirrors. But one in particular caught my attention when I was walking through and I was discussing with Hank and Melanie what I thought it was. And I noticed this huge mirror in the main sitting room that was in a silver frame, or heavily ornate silver frame. And I stopped mid-step. I felt like I was being watched. Something was watching me. It was a cold sensation that started in my arms and just flowed through my entire body. I knew something was focusing its attention on me. And I realized that whatever it was that was staring at me with such intent was coming from this mirror. And I looked at the grandmother who was with us at the time, and I asked her how long that mirror had been in the house, how long they'd owned it. She said that mirror had been hanging on that wall since before the Civil War, and they have owned it, and it was part of the family property even before that, before the Civil War, and it had been on that location ever since then. And that's when it dawned on me that I wasn't dealing with some mindless goblin or mindless fair creature, some little trickster or something that was just there screwing around. I started to suspect it was something a lot nastier, a lot more intelligent, a lot more malevolent. But the only way for me to be sure was to open my senses and come in contact with the mirror to see if it would respond to me, because I knew it was watching me alone. Nobody else was feeling this. I felt like it was looking straight through me. It was peering at every part of my physical and spiritual body, I believe. So I approached the mirror, and as I got closer and closer to the mirror, my face rippled in the mirror, like somebody dropped water on the mirror, on a pond, and I could see a ripple go across my face, just one time, one little ripple across my face. And I reached out with my left hand, and I started tracing the silver frame around the mirror itself, and it was cold. It felt like somebody was shoving icicles in my arm. My veins felt full of just absolute ice. It took my breath away for a moment. And that's when I took my hand and I moved it up to the glass itself, the silver glass itself. And as soon as my hand made contact with that glass, I felt such dark, cold malevolence. I came in contact with something very, very dark, very old. I could feel how old its age. Something that was just, it would never know love. It never wanted anyone else to feel love. I could feel that emotion shooting up my arm. And in my head, I heard something hiss and go, "You're not afraid? Then you need to leave. 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 You're of no use to me if you're not afraid." And I swear it felt like somebody punched me right between the eyes with a snowball. Somebody just dipped their hand in snow and made a snowball around their fist and hit me right between the eyes. And I fell flat on my ass. It felt like I was lying on my ass for, God, hours, but it was only a few minutes. My son ran to my side to pick me up off the floor and get my cane back under me, and everybody was gathered around me, asked me what happened. And I could just say, "Don't touch the mirror." And I made them take their hands off of me. I didn't want anybody else touching me. It was irrational how it made me feel. I was terrified. whatever this thing was, it recognized me. And then somewhere in the back of my head, I thought, I know what this is. I know exactly what the hell this is. And that's when I looked up at Melanie and I went, Melanie, it's a fetch. And my son, who has studied some of the books and some of the lore that I've collected, he just stopped and looked at me and he said, how can that be? A fetch? And I just looked at him and said, it was a fetch. It's a fetch. It's a lot worse than what everybody suspects. It's a flippin' fetch. Okay, guys, what is a fetch? A fetch is a spirit being, a creature that exists in the spirit world. The next world, the spirit world is always is adjacent to the world of the living and to the corporeal world. A fetch is a shape-changing spirit. It can take solid form. Usually, it'll take the form of another person. It'll take the form of a small animal, insects, things like that. The purest definition of a fetch, though, in most lore, especially Irish folklore, fetches, when they appear before people, they usually take the form of a person. They're considered bad luck or ill fortune that will befall the person that they have taken the form of and appeared in front of. To the extreme, it means that person's probably going to die when a fetch appears before them. But the fetch, as a being, as a creature, is far more terrifying and far more insidious and than some fairy tale critter. A fetch feeds off of fear. That's its primary sustenance, is what it needs, fear to survive. They exist to evoke fear and create fear, especially out of children. Because children, of course, it's easier to scare a child and to play off of their fears. And they feed off of it. Fetches, unlike a lot of other spiritual beings, don't need to be invited into your home to come into your home. But what they do need to get into your home and to travel, basically, from the spiritual realm into our world or into someone's house, is a very highly reflective surface. It could be still water, chrome, hell, even a shiny wooden floor, or linoleum. They can use a reflective surface. To them in the spiritual world, this is a window in a door where they can peer through it and see if it's worth their time coming through to feed. In the case of Goblin House, what the fetch was using was the mirror. That old mirror to pass in and out of the house, out of its world into the house, to feed. It's not easy to get rid of a fetch. Leaving it alone, it just becomes more hateful. It's like it's addicted to crack. A little bit of fear is not enough. It needs more and more and more and more. To get its fix every night, it needs more and more fear to be generated. A fetch does. So this thing was just not going. This was just not a one or two times thing. This thing was going to keep coming back to this house over and over and over again, and quite possibly was never going to go away.
Much like Mike thought, the fetch didn't go away easily. According to an email I received from him, it ended with me having to seal the whole house after sealing away the mirror. I got the crap scratched out of me at my house. It followed me home with friends, so I had to seal my house with my blood mixed with gree-gree powder like the family's home. They tortured my dreams for weeks before I finally got rid of them.
There is a haunted house in Greensburg, Indiana, situated by the railroad track. Every night at midnight, the house is visited by a ghost that makes itself known by throwing chairs, tables, utensils, anything it can get its hands on. An Irish family tried to live there, but couldn't take it and moved out. The owner attempted to rent the house out again. This second family only stayed for one night before leaving. The owner of the property, being desperate, offered $25 to anyone that could get the ghost to stop making a menace of itself. A young man of little means accepted the job and made his way to the house, prepared to stay the night. Just as the clock in the house struck midnight, slight noises began being heard, soon followed by groans. Then, the sound of doors being opened and shut in the upstairs hall were heard. These events were strange. This was the first time the ghost acted this way. Maybe the ghost knew the young man was there, trying to get rid of it. The young man, too scared to go upstairs to investigate, waited in the room. Suddenly the door opened to the room he was in, and a lady, dressed in black and very pale, entered the room without ever once breaking eye contact with the young man. He got up and started approaching the apparition. It responded by gliding backwards through the wall into the hall that it had come through. The young man ran for the door to pursue her, but when he made it into the hall, she'd already vanished. According to the owner, the house was the scene of a grisly murder, where a man killed his wife by cutting her heart out. He fled the country and did not return until the war. Records show he died in the Battle of Vicksburg. Without hope for a trial or justice, the woman may be destined to haunt the house forever.
Oh my god! That guy almost sneezed on you! You could have died!
It was a Tuesday night. I was taking a bath, and I noticed a red stain on the floor. I got out to look at the strange stain. That's when I noticed red liquid seeping from the walls. It looked like blood. I put my clothes on and hurried into the hallway. It's on the hallway floor. I called my husband, but he didn't answer. Now I'm really worried. He's 79 and needs dialysis to clean his blood. He's not in the best health. Then he appeared at the other end of the hall, looking fine, just confused. Did someone who was bleeding break into our house? We start searching the house. In the kitchen, it was everywhere. On the walls, puddles under appliances. There was so much blood. It seemed to be too much for even just one person. Terrified, we called the police. They searched the house and were convinced it was blood, but found no source. The police had no explanation for the blood either. They took a sample to the lab. The results showed it was human blood type O. My husband and I both are type A, so it wasn't ours. The police never found the source for the blood. We lived in that house for 22 years and never had an incident. After the house was clean, the blood never came back. Our Atlanta blood house remains a mystery.
It's stupid when anyone else does it, but when I do it, it's awesome.
Jasmine was an only child. It was lonely at times, but it did allow her parents to spoil her with little gifts here and there. She laid in her bed, the quiet hum of the night surrounding her. The glow of her pink nightlight added an element of happiness and femininity to all of her toys and dolls. Everything was as it should be, until she noticed a faint whisper coming from her closet.
Psst. Jasmine. Come here.
It beckoned. She froze. It sounded exactly like her own voice, a perfect mimicry. But how could that be possible?
Jasmine, can you hear me? Why are you scared?
The voice continued.
It's just me. I'm just you.
Jasmine's heart raced. Who are you, and why do you sound like me?
I told you. We're the same,
the voice insisted. Its tone gentle, yet eerie.
Come join me in the closet. Let's play together.
Jasmine did not want to reveal how terrified she was. She calmly replied, But my toys are all out here. Why don't you come out here and play? The voice hesitated.
I can't. It's against the rules. But once you join me in the closet, you'll understand everything.
Jasmine, still terrified, sat on her bed silently.
I have Charlie here.
The closet voice spoke up again. Charlie was Jasmine's toy puppy dog. She would play with him all the time, until one day he got lost. Jasmine looked over at the slightly open closet door, and could just make out Charlie creeping out from behind some boxes. Now she was really confused. Using whatever courage she had, she got up from her bed and carefully began to approach the closet door, her hand reaching for the knob. But before opening it all the way, she paused, listening intently. The whispers had stopped. So she shut the door. That night, Jasmine couldn't fall asleep. When her mom came into her room the next morning, she told her what happened. Her mom assured her it was all just a bad dream, and even went as far as to dig in her closet to prove nothing was there. Jasmine never heard the voice again, but she never forgot the night her own voice called her from the closet.
That concludes night number 5, Horror Fam. I hope these haunted house stories had you checking over your shoulder and questioning every creak and shadow in your own home. From award-winning creepypastas to chilling true stories, including that unforgettable tale from Mike the Naked Bigfoot, tonight was a deep dive into the very heart of fear. Now, while I hope you do get a good night's rest tonight, I also hope you're ready for even more terrifying tales that we have lined up. We've got so much fun planned for tomorrow and beyond, but until then, sleep tight if you can, and remember to take good care of yourselves. Do you like that, ladies?